Hello, Psychology 212. My name is Darcy, and what I'm doing here is giving you a demonstration of what a live presentation may look like for your final project. So we'll just dive right into it. What I did my research on was different levels of tactical training and hiding behavior of military personnel. Before we get started, I do have a disclosure statement. I am currently a serving member of the Canadian Forces. Because of this, I could potentially receive career benefit. The benefits of this research, however, it's been deemed to outweigh the possible conflicts of interest. Now, what is the purpose of this research? Ideally, it is to improve the training effectiveness of members of the Canadian Forces. It's to provide confidence in a specific area of training, and it's to reduce the likelihood of the occurrence of post-traumatic stress disorder, commonly known as PTSD. This could also end up potentially reducing casualties in combat situations. What is the research? Grant McEwen is lucky to have Dr. Eric Legg, and what I did was I took his old research from 2012, and he basically had a research on the hiding behavior of humans, and I expanded on that and wanted to apply it to military applications. So using this same video game platform that he did, I wanted to exhibit differences in hiding behavior based on training regarding different sample participants. Which brings us to my hypothesis. I actually had two. Hypothesis one is the level of training, specifically tactical training, will affect the hiding behavior of individuals with regard to the amount of time taken to hide those objects. This is including training levels within the Canadian Forces and the Canadian Force members versus civilian samples. Hypothesis two is that there will be no statistical significance appearing between civilian and military samples with regard to hiding location preference. Why would this be important? Combat situations are increasingly involved in using things called improvised explosive devices, known as IEDs. IEDs can be hidden and made by anyone. Providing fidelity in the current training may reduce the likelihood of PTSD. How is this operationalized? So we use data recordings from three criteria. These are variables: time taken to hide an object, time taken to locate an object, and then there was a coded obscurity level of chosen location. Who were the subjects? So we used three groups of military subjects: combat engineers, infantry soldiers, and support trades. There were 400 from each of these groups, and these were picked for a very specific reason. Combat engineers are your guys that are the people that have a lot of expertise in explosive ordnance. Infantry soldiers are exposed to this training, and they are very proficient, but they're not quite at that same level of expertise as the combat engineers. Then you have support trades. Support trades are people like weather technicians, logistics people, truck drivers, mechanics of that ilk. And they are familiar with this skill level, but like I said, they're not nearly as highly trained as the other two groups. And then to throw into the mix, because I want to compare it to a sample civilian population, we used 400 civilians of McEwen undergrads. And they were noted as having the novice skill level. What other variables did I use? So within the military, we chose a rank level of corporal. Corporal is where you are fully trained in your respective trades. Not tactically trained, but in your respective trade, you've been in the military long enough that you're considered a very a fully trained member in the forces. And then the skill training level for tactical purposes, that was the independent variable. What did the design look like? Well, it was within subject's design. This highlights the effects of the independent variable quite nicely. Carryover effect wasn't really an issue with the way this was conducted, and less people are needed for within subjects' designs. The experiment itself. Every participant completed two experimental scenarios. There was the object hiding task using indirect deception. With this deception, full participant debriefing was conducted after the experiment, but this allowed for realistic reaction of behavior for generalizability. And then there was an object seeking task. This was conducted through a virtual environment, through a video game platform, and it was of a warehouse. So picture something like a Costco warehouse. Participants received basic gameplay instructions. Participants were not explicitly told to hide objects. They were, however, informed that it could be done. The virtual environment was identical for every participant. So, scenario 1. Participants played against computer opponents. These computer opponents are what I'll refer to as bots. They were tasked with attaining the highest score by destroying these bots. It's a first-person shooter environment, which means if you're not familiar with that, basically you have a 3D look of the warehouse itself. So you turn your mouse left, you look left, you turn your mouse right, you look right. You don't see your own body, you just see this virtual environment. The variety of weapons available to be picked up and used are things like IEDs and projectile weapons, but the IEDs were much more commonly placed at a ratio of 5:1, and they were also made to be much more effective against the enemy bots, which the participants of the experiment would pick up as they played. They would understand that the IEDs were much more effective. IEDs could be hidden anywhere in the virtual environment, under boxes, desk drawers, under garbage cans, or they could be left out in the open. So with the experiment in scenario 1, the program recorded obscurity levels of the hidden IEDs. So if you fully obscured your IED, you got a score of 1. Partially obscured would be a score of 2. Minimally would be 3. And then no obscuration, you get a score of 4. For scenario 2, participants were timed in seeking 10 hidden objects. So the hidden objects they were looking for were either fully obscured, and there were 3 of those items. Partially obscured, and there was 3 of those items. Minimally and no obscuration, there was 2 of each of those. And this is the results we got. So, if you look to the graph, you have your expert training level, and then it basically what we found, and it's not really very surprising, higher training levels translating to more efficient hiding and finding tasks. So the experts have the lowest time taken for this task, followed by your proficient level, then your familiar, then your novice. And if you remember, the expert levels, those are the combat engineers, proficient were infantry soldiers, familiar were the support trades, and then novice were the civilians, undergrads. For the results for supporting hypothesis 2, there was no significant difference between sample groups for preference of hiding places. Essentially, everybody from each group hid their items in the same positions. So what does this all tell us? Well, we'll have to review the goal of the experiment. So this was to exhibit the impact of training level on time taken to hide or find an object. Displaying similarities of behavior between civilian and military samples regarding location of a hidden object as well was shown. Why time the placement and the placement speed? This would provide insight into hiding behavior of different people. So what we had in mind when we did this was that if you have a militarized civilian body, which has happened throughout the world, and they are in conflict with a military organization, this will give us an idea of where the civilian militarized population is likely to hide IEDs, or if time is a factor and they're in a rapid retreat because the military that they're in conflict with is coming up on them, due to time they could discern where likely hiding places of those IEDs would be. So this brings us to why do an experiment with an obvious answer? So, literature reviews that I did provided no military-civilian comparison of this specific behavior. An obvious answer is not an answer until it's actually tested. And the answer of no statistical significance was a very valuable answer for these purposes. So how does this potentially reduce PTSD or casualties? So there's a bit of a cascade effect here. So military members can become susceptible to PTSD through anxiety or stress. PTSD increases the likelihood of suicide. Demonstrating no significant difference can increase the confidence in the CF member's training. The increased confidence can actually reduce stress levels of military members. Reduced stress levels can reduce occurrences of PTSD. The limitations of this. So the software we use is very well known. It's a first-person shooter game. It was Half-Life 2, and it's been around since 2004. So the familiarity could potentially lead to unaccounted for effects on results. A way around this for future would be designing a software program from the ground up to mitigate such situations. So you create a program that no one is familiar with, very proprietary, and just use it for this experiment. Which brings us to future research. The virtual environment, you can provide countless scenarios. Replace bot programs with human versus human situations to see the interaction at play there would be an interesting find. And then the use of virtual outdoor environments would be also interesting to see, and you could use things like weather, time of day, or more complex terrain to see how that throws into the mix. This would be the point where I would ask if you have any questions. However, this is not a live presentation. Hopefully we will get there back this winter. Best of luck with your project, and here is my reference page.